I've just returned from the East, from New England. I had a chance to talk with many people, some of whom are considered some of the very outstanding leaders and people of our nation. I believe that I was uttering the truth when I said to them that the Negroes of St. Augustine, Florida, and those that have come in from other communities and their allies in the white community are determined to march the streets of this city until the walls of segregation come crumbling down.
Outlook, another in a weekly series of in-depth reports on issues and news events of interest to the South Florida community. Tonight, St. Augustine, Fountain of Dissent, Report 3, an exclusive behind-the-scenes look at Reverend Martin. In the midst of the rioting, Reverend Martin Luther King was arrested during a sit-in attempt. St. Augustine's racial problems became a national issue.
Good evening. On May 9th, Outlook presented the first in a series of reports on the racial crisis in the historic city of St. Augustine. In Report 1, St. Augustine, Fountain of Dissent, I observed that the oldest city's white community stubbornly refuses to form a biracial committee and had painted itself into a corner of bigotry and fear. On May 16th, in Report 2, Outlook analyzed the causes and probable consequence of the paralysis of fear and silence that had rendered responsible citizens helpless in a period of community crisis. Again, I suggested the formation of a biracial committee, but concluded incorrectly that this prospect without further violence is unlikely. Into this combustible vacuum stepped the kinetic presence of the Reverend Martin Luther King, Jr., promptly sparking the promised long, hot summer of racial demonstrations. In a moment, St. Augustine, Fountain of Dissent, Report 3, an inside look at Reverend King's nonviolent army and the outlook for the city in which it moves. For a year prior to Reverend King's arrival, St. Augustine's pot of racial troubles boiled sporadically under the leadership of Dr. Robert B. Hailing, the local chairman of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. During the summer of 1963, Hailing led the first integration demonstration in downtown St. Augustine. But his reported intemperance in dealing with the white leaders barred the way to the conference table. King's presence pushed Hailing into the background and may have opened the door to a peaceful solution. The initial impact of the Negro leaders' presence out. On June 11th, the day following the first violent night march, Reverend King led a group of sit-in demonstrators to the restaurant at the Monson Motor Lodge. He was stopped at the door by James Brock, the soft-spoken owner. Their conversation was polite but to the point. "You're going to have to integrate," said the Negro leader. Brock answered that he would under federal court order, or if a group of St. Augustine businessmen prevail upon me. "Won't you leave?" he asked. But King was there for only one reason, to capture the headlines by getting arrested. The polite exchange lasted perhaps 3 minutes before police arrived and escorted King and 7 followers to jail. It marked the 14th time Martin Luther King went behind bars since he organized the Atlanta bus boycott in 1957. 2 days later, King was taken from the St. Augustine jail to testify before a grand jury probing a racial problem, then taken to Jacksonville to testify in federal court against another attempt to prohibit nighttime demonstrations.